Welcome everybody to our second class in which we are examining this book, Karma by Annie Besant. We are trying to go through the main points that Annie Besant makes in this book and explore the teachings that she is putting forth, and then trying to understand the foundations of it and give some examples that can illustrate the main concepts. So for that, I have a PowerPoint with the main paragraphs that I'm going to comment on, but there are more concepts in the chapter. Of course, we don't have time to go through everything in the book, so I recommend you to read the whole book. There are some other parts that may not need a particular comment, that's why I'm not including it, but that are interesting nevertheless. So in the last class we have talked about how the thoughts, every psychological activity, thoughts and emotions that we undergo are not merely subjective moods in consciousness, but also produce an objective form, an objective energy, which is able to affect people, affect situations, affect ourselves. And it is through these thought forms, as Annie Besant called them, that the workings of karma are based on. During the book, she will explain how this really happens, but now we are setting the foundation for that understanding. So tonight we are going to explore the activity of these thought forms and then illustrate them, how this serves as the basis for karma, as I was saying. So Annie Besant begins this section by saying, the life period of these ensouled thought forms, remember that when we think, we produce a form in the astral matter of the higher aspect of the astral plane, and then that matter is ensouled by a kind of intelligent energy or semi-intelligent energy that is the elemental kingdom of nature. So we produce a form, and that form is ensouled by this semi-intelligent consciousness, and that ensouled thought form becomes an entity on the astral plane for a longer or shorter period, which is what Annie Besant will explain here. So she says that the life period of these ensouled thought forms depends first on the energy bestowed upon them by their human progenitor. So first by the energy that we put in producing this thought form, a thought that is thought just superficially or in passing. We have a little energy, a thought that is being produced with full thinking and identification and emotion. We have far more energy. So that will be part of the factor that will determine how long that thought form is going to last. So first on this, and secondly on the nutriment supplied to them after their generation by the repetition of the thought either by him or by others, by other people. So first by the original energy that was imparted to it, and second by the repetition of the same kind of thought by other people. Remember that when this thought form is produced on the astral plane, then it is attracted to different people, to people who may be in tune with that particular kind of thinking or feeling. When we talk about the astral plane, remember that the astral plane is a plane of the emotions, And these thought forms that we are talking about are thoughts that are normally tied with the emotional aspect. There are other subtler aspects of thinking, and more abstract thinking, but we are not talking about those at the moment. So Annie Besant says that their life, the life of the thought forms, may be continually reinforced by this repetition. And a thought which is brooded over acquires great stability of form on the psychic plane. So again, thought forms of a similar character are attracted to each other and mutually strengthen each other, making a form of great energy and intensity active in this astral world. So not only these thought forms are attracted to people, but thought forms of the same kind tend to come together and reinforce each other. So we generate this kind, as we are going to see, these kinds of entities on the astral plane that becomes actual influences on our way of seeing, thinking, feeling. Annie Besant goes on saying, thought forms are connected to their progenitor by what, for want of a better phrase, we must call a magnetic tie. So as we produce a thought form, there is like a tie that keeps them related to us and keeps them connected to us. Then they react upon this person, the person that produced them, producing an impression which leads to their reproduction. So when we think a certain kind of thought, that thought stays connected to us, and then it stimulates the production of similar thoughts. Where a thought form is reinforced by repetition, a very definite habit of thought may be set up, a mold into which thought will readily flow, helpful if it be of a very lofty character, as a noble ideal, for example, but for the most part, cramping and a hindrance to mental growth. So as we generate all these different thought forms, the ones that are more predominant will tend to produce a stronger effect on us and try to awaken similar responses. And this is how habits are created. We all have an experience of how difficult habits are how difficult it is to break habits. And this is because there are some living entities, if we want to see it that way, that are actually feeding from our thinking and feeling in a particular way. And like anything in nature, these entities are trying to survive, to last longer. This is how consciousness evolves. Consciousness is within forms, and part of the aim of consciousness is to preserve the forms. So these elementals that are ensouling these thought forms are trying to preserve that form. And for that, they instinctively feel that they can get their food by stimulating the creator of that thought to repeat that kind of vibration. So Annie Besant explains how this can be an example of a very simple karmic cycle. She says, here we have a little karmic cycle. The mind makes a habit. So we start thinking about something, thinking and feeling about something in a particular way, and we generate a habit. And is then obliged to work within that limitation. Once the habit is there, it becomes a conditioning to our consciousness. Whenever we are going to think about a particular subject, we will tend to think first according to the habit, or think or feel whenever we have to react to a particular situation. Once we produce the habit, the first reaction, the first impulse will be to respond according to the habit. But our consciousness retains its freedom within the limitation and can work against it from within till it wears it out. So if we become aware that there is a particular habit or habitual reaction, there is the power in consciousness to realize that and to work through the habit. According to the maturity of consciousness, this working through the habit may be very active at the level of thinking, like consciously trying to set up an opposite habit that may counteract this one. Or if consciousness is more mature, the very act of the very pure awareness begins to sever the tie between this psychic habit and consciousness. But we are going to see that later. Whatever the case, we create a habit, we are conditioned by it, and then we always retain the possibility of breaking this conditioning, but that will, karmically speaking, require an effort to undo what we did or what consciousness did in the past. So Annie Besant says, when we come into the world in any new incarnation, we come encumbered with these fetters of our own past making. But the process as regards each separate fetter runs the above round. The mind forgets it, forges it, wears it, and while wearing it, can file it through. So we create it, we are limited by it, and we can break it. Of course, the situation is far more complex because there is not one single habit. As we begin in our evolution to generate this mental activity, there are many different habits that they all modify each other. And sometimes a particular habit is active in consciousness, then that disappears, and then a new habit is stimulated that may be the opposite to the previous one in certain ways. And there are this multitude of I's in ourselves. Some want to be spiritual, some want to be mundane, some want to enjoy, some want to be lazy. And all these different psychic habits we call I. And the truth is that there is not this homogeneous I. There is this collection of habits, and there is the homogeneous awareness that is trying to express itself through this psyche that was generated. So then she talks about another aspect of the thought forms, and she said that they may also be directed by their progenitor towards particular persons who may be helped or injured by them, according to the nature of the ensouling elemental. The elemental, remember, is like the energy slash semi-consciousness. They are not conscious in the sense of a human being. The elementals are elemental kind of consciousness that have a certain instinctive activity, maybe like some animals or lower animals, insects and lower kind of animals. And this energy slash consciousness is attracted to the thought form according to what kind of thought or emotion came from the person. If we saw this in the last class, if a person is feeling love, then it will attract elementals that are in tune with that kind of vibration. If the person is feeling anger, it will attract a different kind of elementals. And then those elementals will tend to reproduce the same kind of feeling in people around and in the person that created the thought form. So when we think, we can also direct these thought forms to a particular person or place or situation. We may do this consciously or unconsciously. When, for example, in the context of the Theosophical Society, it's very common to do meditations for peace or or healing meditations, or trying to send good thoughts to people who are in need, then we are consciously directing these thought forms to people. But then also when we are angry at a person, we are thinking of the person with our anger, we are sending this kind of bad elementals. Or when we are just thinking with love about a person, then we are sending to this person a loving elemental, kind of unconsciously. We are not intending to send it, but nevertheless, the act of placing our attention on a person or a place or a situation directs the elementals there. But always remember that even though we send it, there is always this connection. So when we send goodwill to other people, we are also generating a storehouse of goodwill for ourselves. Not in the sense of more in the sense of we are setting up the possibility of feeling goodwill more easily than feeling ill will, for example. So Annie Besant says it is not mere poetic fancy that good wishes, prayers, and loving thoughts are of value to those to whom they are sent. They form a protective host encircling the beloved and guard off many an evil influence and danger. So, many times it's this idea that love protects, and actually it does do that. It produces a kind of protection. Okay, so then the next point is that not only we generate and send forth these thought forms, but we also attract this kind of or any kind of thought forms as a magnet, and according to what kind of state of consciousness we are normally in. So Annie Besant says that the person also serves as a magnet to draw towards himself the thought forms of others from the astral plane around him, of the classes to which his own ensouled thought forms belong. So all these thought forms that are, if you want to put it in a visual way, they are floating around us. They are like a magnet to attract similar kinds of thought forms. He may thus attract to himself large reinforcements of energy from outside, and it lies within himself whether these forces that he draws into his own being from the external world shall be of a good or of an evil kind. So you start seeing how, all this happens whether we know it or not. Sometimes when we read this, it may produce the idea of, this is terrible or very dangerous. And yes, from a certain point it is, but that's how we live right now. So knowing about this can help us be more aware of what we are thinking. We in our culture, the morality that our culture developed is not very much evolved, let's say. The morality goes only as far as the actions, and even the actions, it's try to do good actions as long as somebody is looking around. If somebody is not looking around, then it doesn't matter so much. But the idea of what we feel and what we think as being part of this morality, as being important, is hardly ever there just in our culture. But actually, the way we think, the way we feel, is what determines how we are going to act. So unless we are aware of this and we begin to stimulate in ourselves this state of self-observation, of awareness, then we are just blind victims of all these forces that we don't know that we are attracting. We don't know that we are making them, or we are producing our own conditioning, and therefore we cannot do anything about it. So the first step is to realize this, The second step is to become aware of this, how actually happens in ourselves. And then the third step is to see how to deal with it. And there again, there are different strategies according to the maturity of the person. So if a man's thoughts are pure and noble, he will attract around him hosts of beneficent entities, and may sometimes wonder whence comes to him the power for achievement that seems, and truly seems, to be so much beyond his own. Similarly, a man of foul and base thoughts attracts to himself hosts of maleficent entities, and by this added energy for evil, commits crimes that astonish him in the retrospect. Some devil may have tempted me, he will cry, and truly these demoniac forces, called to him by his own evil, add strength to it from without. In all religions there is this idea of the demons and Satan in some way or the other. In the Theosophical view, these entities are not really demons that exist out there. They are generated by ourselves. And the elementals are not evil or good. They just reproduce certain energies. Just as you wouldn't say that a tiger is evil because it kills a human being that may be in the forest and the tiger was hungry. In the same way, you wouldn't say that an elemental that resonates with anger is evil because it stimulates anger in other people. That's just the nature of the elemental. It's just an energy, and on its own level, it's neither good or bad. But when those energies, or when we open the door for those energies to work through us, then that becomes evil, or evil relatively speaking. So there are these external influences that may condition our actions for good or ill, but they are not extra cosmic gods and demons. They are just the karmic result of the way we think and we feel, how we see ourselves, the world, and how we relate to it. So then it says, the elementals and souling thought forms link themselves to the elementals in the man's desire body. But for this, they must find entities of their own kind with which to link themselves. Else can they exercise no power. And further, elementals in an opposite kind of thought form will repel them, and the good man will drive back by his very atmosphere, his aura, all that is foul and cruel. It surrounds him as a protective wall and keeps evil away from him. So there is this, as Annie Besant said, figuratively speaking, this magnetic kind of effect. If around us we have certain thought forms that tend to resonate with love and compassion and helpfulness, they will tend to reject the ones that are of an opposite vibration, the ones that are related to anger and all this. Of course, this is not a all or nothing effect. In our process of evolution, we generate a lot of thought forms that are still attached to ourselves. So there are always doors for all kinds of, or most kinds of feelings. But overall, whatever is the state of consciousness in ourselves for most of the day is what will be more predominantly influent more stronger in our aura. So if predominantly we feel goodwill, then that will tend to reject a lot of bad influence that comes constantly from the environment. We are in a world where people all around are constantly feeling jealousy, anger, sadness, aggression, and also to some extent the good feelings. But if we see the general state of the world, there at this point in evolution, there is a tendency to be more of the selfish feelings than the altruistic one. So by cultivating or by keeping an eye on our own constitution and trying to give room only to the feelings that are worth our approval, then we generate this protection around us, and that will allow us not to be so conditioned to see the world and ourselves in a particular way. When consciousness looks through thought forms, it is always conditioned, but the conditioning through evil thought forms, through thought forms that are very far away from the perception of truth, the truth of unity, then that's a very strong conditioning for consciousness to see the truth. The conditioning that comes through good thought forms, through thought forms that are related to love and compassion, is not so strong. And once that is the predominant influence in our mental body and our emotional body, then it's easier for consciousness to go beyond even that conditioning and to see beyond any mental concept. So this is why it is important to start working and trying to see what kind of things we allow to come in. Then she takes up another point that is necessary to explore in trying to understand how karma works. She says there is another form of elemental activity that goes to make up karma. When a man sends out a thought form, it not only keeps up a magnetic link with him, but is drawn towards other thought forms of a similar type. These congregate together on the astral plane, forming a good or evil force embodied in a kind of collective entity. To these aggregations of similar thought forms are due the characteristics of family, local, and national opinion. They form a kind of astral atmosphere through which everything is seen and which colors that to which the gaze is directed. Such family, local, or national karmic surroundings largely modify the individual's activity and limit to a very great extent his power of expressing the capacities he may possess. Suppose an idea should be presented to him, he can only see it through this atmosphere that surrounds him, which must color it and may seriously distort. This is the basis for what is sometimes called collective karma. When we are born as Annie Besant says, in a family, in a particular culture or country, we live surrounded by these kind of thought forms, and they are constantly feeding the kind of view that we have of the world. And of course we can break that conditioning, but it requires a serious work on our awareness and on being attentive to why we respond in a certain way, why we think of something in a certain way. So this is how the collective karma works. When a person is drawn into a country, that person will be under certain conditions, physically, emotionally, and mentally. And that will put a limitation on what the person could be. And of course, where we are born depends on what kind of elementals we have created, because we are attracted to a country that serves to feed the kind of elementals that we have been accumulating. Of course, karma is far more complex than that, but we are seeing like the general principles. So we are born in situations that respond to what we have built in ourselves. And then, as Annie Besant explained at the beginning, those situations will condition us. So all this is, to me, a call to our attention about the necessity to develop this self-observation, this self-awareness. As Krishnamurti many times would emphasize, our mind is conditioned. And unless we can become aware of that conditioning, there is no room for intelligence. We respond to things not because we intelligently thought them out and tried to understand them, but because we were born in this family and country, and everybody responds like that, and I respond like that. Even though I may think that I'm different, I'm responding according to the country, the family, the surroundings. Unless we work on our awareness, unless we question why we think in certain ways, unless we begin to do this inner work. And the aim of this kind of knowledge is to encourage us to do this. So she says, the influence of these congregated elementals is not confined to that which they exercise over men through their desire bodies. So far we have been examining what happens on the astral plane, how they influence our emotional body, and we all know that the emotions influence the way we think. When this collective entity is made up of thought forms of a destructive type, the elementals act as a disruptive energy, and they often work on the physical plane. They are the sources of accidents, of natural convulsions, of storms, cyclones, hurricanes, earthquakes, and floods. And this is a typical theosophical teaching. I'm sure it's also present in some other traditions, but I have not found this teaching very well spelled out in other traditions. But the idea is, many times we talk about when talking about evil, there are two kinds of evil, philosophy says. The moral evil, the one that human beings produce, and the natural evil. Now, a lot of this natural evil would be the suffering that is produced by nature. Now, in the Theosophical view, a lot of these things that happen in nature are the direct result of our own mental and emotional activity. This is why when enlightened beings talk about the world, for example, and people come to them and tell them, how can we change the world? They always point out to the idea that the world is a projection of ourselves, of our own psychological activity. And to a very large extent, it is. And the only way that the world can be really changed is by changing the consciousness of humanity. And of course, we cannot force anybody to change. What we can do is to change ourselves and then become forces to stimulate others to change, to inspire others to change if they are willing to do so. So even many of these earthquakes and floods, etc., are produced by the aggressive elementals that we are generating. So far, this is what she talks about, the generating of thought forms. And now we can explore a little deeper how karma is produced, how karma is generated. So Annie Besant says, we are in a position to at least partially understand something of the generation and working out of karma during a single life period. She will explore one life period, but then she explains, by life period, I mean a little cycle of human existence with its physical, astral, and devachanic experiences, including its return to the threshold of the physical plane. who in our previous At Home with Theosophy, that it's available on our website, and we explore the processes that happen after death. And very, very briefly, a whole period of existence, as Annie Besant is talking about here, involves what we call life, the physical life, then a period of existence on the astral plane where emotions and thoughts are sorted out, so that only the ones that are in tune with the spiritual worlds are retained. It's the kind of purification period. Then there is a stage of devachan, is called in the Theosophical teachings. It's a stage in which consciousness dwells on the spiritual planes, and this is typically perceived by consciousness as a state of bliss and peace. And then there is a process of coming back into incarnation, going to the astral plane, collecting again, as we are going to see, all these thought forms that were left in seed, waiting for us, and then generating a physical body. So Annie Besant is going to explore karma, how karma works in one cycle, one of these cycles of incarnation. She says, it is important to realize that the residence outside the physical body, on the astral plane and the devachan, is far more prolonged than the residence in it, and the workings of karmic law will be but poorly understood unless the activity of the soul in the non-physical condition be studied. Since most of us don't have an awareness of our life on the inner planes, we tend to think that existence is just this physical life, and all our concerns are focused on this physical life. And but in the experience of the soul, according to the Theosophical view, we may live on these physical planes, say, up to 100 years, but then on the inner planes, according to the evolution of the soul will be for about 600 years to 2,000 years. So the experience on the physical plane is actually relatively small when you compare it with all the experience after death. And the soul actually doesn't care much about what the experience on the physical plane is, because it knows that it's just a short period where there is something to be done, something to be experienced, but the soul doesn't look in this short-sighted way to its own existence. So it looks at the physical life in relation to its truer life that happens on the inner planes. Ed has raised his hand. Let's see what he has to say. Go ahead, Ed.
So it seems to me that this picture has us producing a lot of garbage elementals that we have to, over many lifetimes, which we have to clean up in some way or another, and yet we're giving very short time to do this cleanup. We could only seem to clean this stuff up while in physical form. So what's wrong with that picture?
Yes, it is true that we can work on these elementals while being on the physical plane. Now, the idea is that on the physical plane is the world of causes, in the sense that this is when we produce the conditioning. And we produce this conditioning according to how much of the innate wisdom can be expressed through the physical body. So there is like a cycle there, the more conditioning there is, the less wisdom can be expressed. Therefore, the person will tend to produce more conditioning. And actually, when talking about the process of evolution, the idea is that there is like a curve that starts very slow and then it begins to go faster and faster as the soul evolves. But the saving aspect of this, or the positive aspect of this theory, is that when most of the time of the soul in this life period is spent on devachan, on the mental plane, which is when the soul gets rid of all the conditioning for the time being. So in the moment of devachan is when the soul assimilates the experience on the physical plane. And for a long period of time, it learns how to relate to the universe on the physical plane, and learns what things are not good to do because they produce more conditioning and separation and fragmentation. So when the soul comes back, there is more wisdom than before. So the soul takes back all the conditioning that left behind, but now there is more wisdom to deal with that old conditioning. Again, at the beginning, the growth in devachan is not very marked because the soul is still in a state of slumber. We are talking about this originally, this universal consciousness, universal awareness that is not individual, is just universal. And then when the rays are reflected on the lower planes and is encased by matter, to use this metaphor, that awareness is like stunned, let's say. There is a process of learning how to express through denser matter. So at the beginning of evolution, there is consciousness is kind of dormant, just like we see in a baby. When a baby is born, consciousness is dormant, and then little by little it awakens. So at the beginning, the progress in devachan is not very marked, but getting closer to the latter half, from one lifetime to the next, there is a big learning, and one personality can be very different, very much wiser from the previous one. So I would say that that is the saving grace of the process of evolution, at least how it is depicted in the Theosophical teachings, and it's all the time that the soul has to work on this without the conditioning, because the conditioning died during the post-mortem process. We can keep on discussing this later on if there is a need for any clarification or more discussion. So let's see, Annie Besant says, the soul, working as mind, creates a mental image. So she will explain now what happens above the astral plane. So working as mind on the mental plane creates a mental image. This is the initial stage of what is generally spoken of as a thought form. So first there is a mental image. This mental image remains attached to its creator, part of the content of his consciousness. So suppose these mental images that we create are like seeds on the mental body. They are part cells of the mental body. It is a living, vibrating form of subtle matter. It cannot be separated from him. He carries it with him during his earthly life and the regions beyond death. Now, when the physical body dies and goes to the astral plane, Annie Besant explains, on his ascent, going to a higher plane, he carries its essential form on the mental matrix. So even though we divest ourselves from all the thought forms, we retain the seed that was a producer of the thought forms, that is this mental image, which is part of consciousness. And then she says, on his return to the lower planes, it is again built into the mental matrix, and the appropriate denser form is reproduced. So she's explaining in a very brief way a process that is a little more complex. But think of it at the level of seeds. There are seeds that are part of the mental body, and they are retained even in Devachan. But the seeds are like dormant. When the soul incarnates again, those seeds are vivified again, and then these mental images will begin to produce thought forms. So the mental image would be a tendency to see the world in a certain way, out of the experience in the previous incarnations and how we responded to that. So that pattern, that archetype of seeing the world in a certain way is retained. When we come back to incarnation, then and we begin to relate to the world, then that seed is activated and it begins to produce thought forms again. This mental image may remain sleeping, as it were, for long periods, but it may be reawakened and revivified. Every fresh impulse from its creator, from its progeny, from entities of the same type, increases its life energy and modifies its form. So we have this seed that can be awakened either by ourselves or by other thought forms that we have created. Remember that the thought forms react on us. Or by these entities of the same form, thought forms that were created by other people that we attract to ourselves because we have that seed there. So for whatever reason, the seeds can be vivified again and become active. Actually, part of the education of the children should be concerned, and Annie Besant or Leadbeater wrote a little about this, should be concerned in trying to vivify the good seeds and keep dormant the bad seeds, if we want to put it in a simple way. So, because we come with all kinds of seeds, but if we help the kid to vivify first the good seeds, then he may have more tools to deal with the awakening of the conditioning as he inevitably goes through life. So Annie Besant says that that this evolves according to definite laws, and the aggregation of these mental images makes the character of a person. The outer mirrors the inner. So, what we call character is just the summatory of all these different mental images that we have created and the thought forms that are produced by it. Consciousness in itself is unconditioned. It is the vehicle of expressions of consciousness, the mind and the emotions, that in the process of evolution begin to build all this conditioning. At the beginning, the conditioning is necessary because what has to happen for consciousness to develop self-consciousness, to develop the idea of I am myself, is that this universal consciousness has to be limited, has to be conditioned. Otherwise, it never is anything else but universal consciousness. So this conditioning is a way to produce a fragmentation in the universal consciousness so that the one spark or the one moon can be reflected in many moons, in many lakes, if you want to put it that way. But then this conditioning begins to, as always in nature, after it served its purpose, begins to be a fetter. Just like a kid, may use something to aid him to walk, may use a baby walker. Then after a while, when he is supposed to walk by himself, then that becomes a hindrance for the walking. So this is something, a metaphor for what happens with consciousness. Now, she says a mental image may be stimulated into activity by desire. The Sanskrit term is kama. It may be self-motivated to a noble ideal, or it may be led by purely intellectual concepts. So it may be a desire, it may be something that we aspire to, or it may be just the working of our mind. But lofty or base, it is always the product of the creative soul, and on its existence, individual karma depends. Without this mental image, these seeds, there can be no individual karma linking life period to life period. This is what in Yogacara Buddhism, for example, they call the alaya vijnana, this kind of body in which all the karmic causes are kept. And in Theosophy it's called the causal body. In Hinduism, the Karana Sharira, which means causal body. So there has to be, if there is to be a continuity of this conditioning, there has to be something that is beyond the cycle of incarnation that retains the seeds. This is a philosophical concept for those who are interested in the metaphysics of the subject. So let us now consider the mental image in relation to the ensouled thought form, and she calls it the astro-mental image. Remember that the thought forms are produced on the astral plane. These seeds are on the mental plane, the plane that is above the astral. So we have two kinds of images, the mental image, the seed, and what she calls the astro-mental image, that is the thought form, the actual form that is produced from the seed. She says the thought form in the lower astral plane. The vibrations of the mental image, the seed, set up similar vibrations in the denser astral matter, and these cause the thought form. The thought form is the one that is projected, that is emanated. The mental image itself remains in the consciousness of its creator, but its vibrations, passing outside that consciousness, reproduce its form in the denser matter of the lower astral plane. The life period of an astro-mental image, the thought form, may be long or short according to circumstances, and its perishing does not affect the persistence of its parent, of the mental image. So the mental image there is a pattern. The thought form may last longer or shorter according to all the conditions that we already explored. And even when the thought form may disappear, the seed is still there. Actually, when Patanjali talks about these are called vasanas in Hinduism. And when Patanjali talks about trying to get rid of these vasanas, this conditioning, he says that there are like 2 or 3 states in which the vasanas may be. One may be very active. It's when the mental image is very active and producing constantly thought forms, and these thought forms produce this kind of atmosphere that really conditions our view. And he says in these cases the vasanas have to try to be neutralized by thinking of the opposite virtue. So basically what you are doing, since you are conditioned by this strong atmosphere, you have to try to consciously fight it off. So you try to generate the opposite view, the opposite feeling, the opposite kind of understanding that, as we saw, is going to purify a little or somehow purify the mental and the astral atmosphere. But that is not going to eradicate the mental image that was producing these wrong thought forms. The mental image is still there. So Patanjali says only through meditation, and by meditation he defines dhyana, the word meditation, as the constant attention to something. So we could call it awareness. only through meditation, through this constant awareness, can the vasana be burned, can this seed be burned. In other words, this mental image, that is the seed of the thought forms, can be destroyed, but through this awareness, through meditation not in the sense of just watching our breathing, but perceiving the mental image, the conditioning, understanding it, and breaking the identification with it. We are going to talk about this later too. So she says any fresh impulse given to the latter, to the mental image, will cause it to generate afresh its astral counterpart, or the thought form. The vibrations on the mental image do not only pass downward to the lower astral plane, but they pass upwards also into the spiritual plane above it, and generate a far subtler form. And she says it is not formed to us on the higher, in the Akasha. These Akashic images abide forevermore and are the true karmic records, the book of the Lipika. So she says we have the mental image. On the lower planes it produces the thought forms that are projected. On the higher plane, the Akashic plane, it produces a record, an imprint of that mental image. I'm going to actually, just by chance, I suppose, I'm going to give a lecture on the Akashic records next week, not this Thursday, but the next Thursday. So we are going to see this in more detail. But the idea is that there is a personal record of the mental image. This is the mental image that is on our mental body. There is a universal record, that is the Akashic record. And then there is the action of that record, that is the thought form. And these Akashic images are this universal record of the karma of each person. And then she talks about the Lipika. The Lipika are the name that Blavatsky uses for what is sometimes called the Lords of Karma, which is this intelligence that organizes karma. We are not going to go into that right now. Just take it in a symbolic way. Like, karma is organized by an intelligence, the recording angel of Christianity, and the tablets on which karma is recorded is this Akashic record. So she says this imperfect description gives some faint idea of karma in its aspect as a cause. In the Akasha will be pictured the mental image created by a soul, inseparable from it. Then there is the astro-mental image, the thought form, produced by it, the active and souled creature, ranging the astral plane and producing innumerable effects. All is in connection with, and therefore traceable to its parent, to the person that produced this mental image, and from there the thought form. Each such thread being recognizable by its own shade of color. However many such threads may be woven into an effect, each thread is distinguishable and is traceable to its originally fourth giver, the soul that generated the mental image. So we produce all these thought forms that are linked magnetically to us, as we said. Those thought forms may unite to some others and may produce some kind of effect, and whatever responsibility this thought form had in producing a certain effect, good or ill, can be traced back to the creator. It's just a question of responsibility. And even though a karmic cause may be very complex, may be the summatory of many different influences, each one of the influences can be traced back to the creator. I see Roger has his hand up. Let me finish. We are finishing this, and then we will open the discussion part. So Besant says, thus we may figure the way in which individual responsibility is seen at a glance by the great lords of karma, the administrators of karmic law, the full responsibility of the soul for the mental image it creates, and the partial responsibility for its far-reaching effects, greater or less, as each effect has other karmic threads entering into its causation. So as I said, there may be an effect that has 1,000 thought forms there, and there is a portion of responsibility for that from a particular soul, but of course not the whole of it. Okay, so this is more or less how Annie Besant is setting the ground so that we can understand certain things later of how karma more or less can be explained. And remember that any explanation of these very, abstract laws is partial, but how we can make a mental picture to understand certain aspects of the karmic work. So on the diagram that you have there are two planes, the spiritual plane and the psychic plane, which includes the higher astral and the lower astral. On the spiritual plane, we have the Akasha, and we have the Akashic images that form the karmic record. On the higher astral, we have the mental images remaining in the creator's consciousness. This higher astral, Annie Besant described as kama manas. Kama is emotion and manas is the lower aspect of the mind. So this higher astral is the activity of if we go back to the previous diagram that she showed, is the activity of the mental body. And then the lower astral, the emotional body itself, we have the astro-mental images, which would be the thought forms, which are these active entities on the psychic plane. So now we can discuss, or you can ask questions or make comments about what we have explored today. Roger, go ahead. You can go first.
My question regards the Akashic records or the Akashic plane. Does it exist, in fact, on one of the planes that we're familiar with in Theosophy already, or is it in a completely different dimension?
Well, the concept of the planes is more complex than what is normally explained in most of the Theosophical books that are meant for people to get familiar with the main ideas. So we could say, you have the typical layered diagram as we have here on the image. Let's say here we have 3 planes, and the Akasha is part of the mental plane. Now, that is not the whole of the Akasha. Actually, what happens is that these layers that we see here are again like the lower manifestation of deeper layers that in this diagram you could think them as going behind the diagram. So the surface of this diagram that we see is the physical cosmic plane. So the mental plane is the lowest manifestations of Akasha. But if you keep going back, deeper into the diagram, you have higher cosmic planes, and you have deeper and deeper aspects of Akasha. So the cosmic Akasha would be the corresponding to the mental plane, but on deeper planes than the physical. I don't know if it made sense without having actually a diagram to show you, but Do you more or less understand what I mean? Oh, you don't have the mic? Yeah, go ahead.
The Akasha exists on one of the subplanes or several of the subplanes in the mental plane. Do they also exist on the Buddhic and the Atmic?
No, that is called differently. I mean, all this is just differentiations of the same substance. But the Akasha belongs to the third plane, to the mental plane. And the Buddhic plane, its cosmic aspect is called alaya, frequently in the Theosophical teachings. The Atmic plane is sometimes, is seen as or a radiation of Parabrahman. So Akasha is related to the mental plane. On the physical level, or on the human level, is the human mind. On the cosmic level is the mind of the Logos, the cosmic ideation. So the Akasha that we perceive on the mental plane is the lowest manifestation of the whole principle of Akasha. Is there any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Ed.
So Annie mentioned that earthquakes and natural disasters are caused by these karmic effects. Is there anything like, a city produced this karmic effect and therefore the hurricane hit that city or something like that?
Yes, again, I suppose that it's just like in a human being. It's difficult to say A produced a prime, or this effect produced this particular effect, because everything is far more complex. But generally speaking, yes, there is. I always wondered before reading these teachings how many times these earthquakes and these natural disasters happen when there are wars, where people are already really beaten up, and then on top of that they have an earthquake or they have a flood. And many times I would think, how can it be that it wasn't enough with the war, and then it makes sense that all the violence of the war is generating these earthquakes and all that. But generally speaking, yes. But then there are many factors. As you know, everything is interrelated, and there are many different forces working out effects. And also, in the Theosophical view, any law has a kind of intelligence behind. There are no blind or mechanical laws. This kind of intelligence behind is called the Lipikas, or the Lords of Karma. And of course, when we think of the Lords of Karma, we tend to think of little human beings, or like human beings, that are there sitting and pulling the threads of karma. And it's nothing like that. But there seems to be a certain intelligence that may work out the way the effects manifest, or when they manifest, so that they don't crush the possibility of growth. At the beginning of evolution, when there is a lot of ignorance, if the karmic law would immediately return the effects of that were produced before, that would prevent any possibility of growth. Imagine, just from a physical point of view, a savage person kills 10 people, so then that savage person will be killed in the next 10 following lives, and when there is room for any kind of growth. So the idea is that there is a kind of order that at the beginning of evolution, holds the karmic causes so that they don't crush the possibility of learning for the soul. And then as the soul begins to be more and more mature, all this accumulated karma that in Hinduism is called sanchita karma begins to be worked out. So you see some people say, why do honest and good people have all these hard times? And many times evil people, they don't seem to have a hard time. They seem to, to do well. And part of the explanation that sometimes is given is that the evil people are accumulating these negative causes, which because the purpose of karma is an educational one, not a purpose of punishing. So if this karma would come back immediately, then that soul will never acquire experience in dealing with the physical plane. And then when the soul is more mature, all this very old past negative karma begins to work out in life, and it serves as in an educational way, as we were saying, because now the soul can understand. And when difficulties happen, previously it would only produce resentment. Now it may produce wisdom. So the idea here was that, yes, generally speaking, the earthquakes or natural disasters in a city were produced in connection to that city, but then it's not very easy to say what connection, when that happened. The effects are very complex. Any other question or comment? Okay, so I will give you a little exercise if you want, that inspired by what we read. I'll send it in the email. It is always good to try to apply these teachings in one way or the other. And we have been discussing about all this conditioning and the need to begin to be aware. So as a good exercise, I think we could try this week to begin to work on self-observation and to try to see how we react to things and try to see why we react to things. There is a TV program and somebody has an opinion and we react to that opinion with another, and then we can stop and say, why do I think this? Do I really think, did I think this through, or is part of my family, my conditioning, my experience that was probably blindly or ignorantly interpreted? Question it and see, why do you think in the way you think? Why do you see the world in the way you see? Just do it as a game, for fun, and to discover, to learn, and then we can start seeing at a certain level how all this that we have been reading actually works on us. So I'll send the exercise by email. Thank you all for being here, and I hope to see you next week. Have a great week, everybody.